Have you ever noticed that whenever a black person speaks about the white society based upon an accurate account of the history shared between our two racial groups, that oftentimes many other black people will accuse the speaker of being racist towards the white society? Many will even defend the white society and insist that it's ourselves that are now our worst enemies. What explains this common absurd response from so many black people? Many have said that the reason is because black people are too forgiving and or are too forgetful and therefore suffering from collective amnesia. But those explanations are short-sighted and are untrue. Many also blames the noted responsive behavior on the Stockholm syndrome and or the Willie Lynch myth. But those explanations are also both untrue. Saying that black people are suffering from the Stockholm syndrome and the Willie Lynch myth are merely what ignorant people says to try to sound smart. Neither of those premises are the truth of our plight and condition. I can make that statement with the utmost confidence because unlike most people, I've done my research. Those who blindly follow the herd mentality of the ignorant crowd have accepted the premise that our collective condition is the results of the Stockholm syndrome. It's absolutely not. Those who are the most ignorant insist that our collective mental state is caused by the Willie Lynch slave syndrome. You'd have to be the most ignorant to believe that silly myth because it presents what would in fact be the least plausible method used for controlling generations of millions of people. It's simply not how brainwashing is achieved. Whenever people are ignorant, they'll always believe nonsense. I will not be silent to appease black ignorance, especially when it's black ignorance that gives the white oppressors their greatest power over us. Usually people have the right to believe whatever they choose to believe. However, there's a profound exception to this rule when it comes to the oppressed. The oppressed must gain a clear, accurate, and concise understanding of our plight and condition. Because if our understandings are flawed, then all liberating remedies and strategies that stems from those misunderstandings will also be flawed. This is why those of us who know the truth must teach African proverb. The truth of our plight and collective condition is that white oppressive forces systematically exploits their monopoly over information and media images that are fed into the collective minds of black people to manipulate us to think in ways that serves and protects the interests of their white society. It's the true reason why many black people are now self-loathing, perceives ourselves as being our own worst enemies, and reveres Caucasians in spite of their brutally horrific mistreatment of our racial group throughout history. Regardless of how intelligent people are, if it's possible to control the input into the human mind, it's entirely possible to control what people will think and believe. The human mind is like a computer. No matter how efficient it may be, its reliability is only as great as the information fed into it. Because the white society controls most of the information that are fed into the collective minds of black people, white oppressive forces have manipulated the minds of many of us to think in ways that benefits their white society. There are 4 ways to effectively manipulate the human mind, or particularly how to brainwash the collective minds of generations of people: by what we're taught, by what we see, by what we hear, and through repetition. Through the white society's monopoly over the education we're taught, the media images we see, the societal narratives that we hear, and through constant repetition, white oppressive forces have manipulated the collective minds of many black people to think in ways that serves and protects the interests of their white society without most of us even realizing it. We tend to normalize our mindset. More specifically, through their monopoly over the input of what's being systematically fed into our collective minds, white social engineering scientists and white propagandists have given their racial group a favorable, inaccurate image makeover within the collective minds of black people. Moreover, legitimate reasons to resent the white society have been delegitimized within the minds of many of our people. They achieve this by whitewashing their history books to make their racial group appear as having been lesser immoral and more humane in their treatments of us throughout history. They also achieve this through their movies, constantly and perpetually depicting Caucasians as being heroes and white saviors. Most people naively believe that movies are not for nothing more than entertainment. That was never the case. The greatest social messages are promoted through movies. Social norms promoted through films can influence the way of thinking and the cognitive map of the populated audience. In a normal conversation, when using logic and fact, your guard is naturally up. But when you're watching a movie, there's no debate. Your guard is therefore down. The censor part of your brain is not in action. It isn't saying that, yes, I agree with this or I disagree with that, like you would in a debate or a conversation. You're actually in an alpha state, being completely downloaded with ideas, images, and suggestions. White social scientists have exploited this movie manipulation process to give their racial group a favorable image makeover within the collective minds of the black masses. Therefore, most black people are not currently perceiving the white society based upon an accurate interpretation of the true history shared between all racial groups throughout history. Most are instead perceiving the white society based upon the inaccurate favorable white image makeover that they've deliberately embedded into our minds through their movies and TV shows, constantly depicting Caucasians as the white heroes and the white saviors, and through their whitewashed history books that makes them appear have been more humane throughout history than they truly in fact were. This is the true reason why so many black people now revere Caucasians in spite of such a brutally horrific history. To the contrary, white social scientists and white propagandists also exploits their monopoly over the input of what's fed into the collective minds of black people to shift black people's collective aggressions away from the white society and redirect it towards and against ourselves. They achieve this feat through their media propaganda campaigns that exaggerates the issue of black on black crime and that constantly subjects us to receiving only the fraudulent worst narratives about our racial group. Doing so is deliberately designed to mislead us to believe that our core problem lies within ourselves. When black people have been misled to believe that our core problem is an internalized one, this demoralizes us. This shifts black collective aggressions away from the white society and redirects it towards ourselves. It's the true reason why we are now more divided than any previous time in history. It also creates profound black self-hatred and disunity, which attacks the core foundation of what bonds us as a people. Remove a people's self-love and unity, and they can be ruled over indefinitely, perhaps even forever. To our detriment, this is the hidden reality of what has been done to the black population by the white society. Keeping us within this collective condition is how white oppressive forces prevents our ability to unify ourselves against them. It's how they protect their white nation from massive unified black retribution. Until we break the monopoly the white oppressors have over our minds, liberation is not only impossible, it is unthinkable. That's a quote from Neely Fuller Jr. Black people, it's time to wake up and realize that white oppressive forces are deploying information warfare against us. It's the truth of our plight and condition. Information warfare is when distorted information is fed to a targeted population that are designed to make the targeted population think and behave in ways that are against their own interests and that instead serve the interests of those conducting the information warfare. More specifically, it's an offensive psychological warfare propaganda tactic that uses misinformation and disinformation as a weapon to manipulate targeted populations to think and behave in ways that are against their own self-interest. African Americans are the unknowing victims of the most elaborately deployed information warfare in world history. African Americans are, in fact, drowning in disinformation that have been fed into our communities by white propagandists. The ultimate goal is to spread so much disinformation into the Black community until virtually everything believed by the African American population are lies that hinders our liberation. It confuses the Black population to such an extent that we're not able to come together to make any sensible conclusions in the interest of liberating ourselves from white oppression. Case, point, and proof. Their disinformation propaganda campaign is the true reason why many are now insisting that we African Americans are the true indigenous Americans, although countless millions of DNA analysis testings have scientifically confirmed our African identity. When we claim that we're the true indigenous Americans, this creates division between us and the true indigenous Americans. When two oppressed people are divided, this makes the U.S. system of white supremacy much stronger. Their disinformation propaganda campaign is also the true reason why millions of African Americans believe the idiotic ideology that we made the N-word ours and that using it now ridiculously empowers us. The truth is, calling ourselves niggers actually psychologically conditions us to perceive ourselves through a false, inferior identity that aids the white society in maintaining its social dominance over us. They also constantly feed us disinformation, claiming that all study results favor themselves over us. This is being done to instill the myth of their white racial superiority over Black people into our subconscious minds. This makes us feel subservient towards whites and makes us more compliant with white dominance over our lives. They also deploy disinformation propaganda to make us believe that slavery actually benefited us. They do this by miseducating us to believe that our ancestors were illiterate and uncivilized before the Europeans invaded, and by also only showing us the poorest parts of Africa within their white-controlled media. This causes millions of us to literally feel indebted to the white society for having brutally enslaved our ancestors, because we've been manipulated to perceive it as having been a rescue mission that ultimately benefited us. Their disinformation propaganda campaign is also the true reason why many of us are now insisting that we're the true Jews found within a easily proven as fictional Bible written by our most ungodliest enemies. That myth actually keeps us complacently waiting for a fictional Jesus to come down and rescue us. Through their disinformation campaign, they have us kept within a collective psychosis that keeps us looking upwards towards them and believing lesser of ourselves by having us worship a false European Messiah created by Romans and also joining Greek fraternities and sororities. But Christianity is a false religion that plagiarizes concepts from African folklore and principles of Mont. And all of Greece's first scholars received their education from Africans. Because white oppressive force controls most of the information that Black people receive, they've exploited this unfair scenario against Black people. White propaganda constantly feeds false information into the Black community that are designed to manipulate our collective minds to think in ways that serve and protects the interests of their white society. Through their disinformation propaganda campaign, white oppressive forces have brainwashed millions of Black people to love our own enslavement. Those Black people who do not critically think never notice their mental chains. It is time to wake up to our reality. One love and peace.